Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
So last night's CNN debate from Iowa was an absolute travesty. Bernie Sanders won it anyway, but what a goddamn tragedy. Look at this. The clip I showed you on the opening was where Bernie Sanders was asked about the comment that he supposedly made, which is that a woman couldn't win the presidency in 2020. Bernie has denied that claim. He denied it again in the debate. There are sources taking Bernie's side of the story on that matter. There's a vast historical record. And when Bernie denied that claim, the moderator saw it fit to simply go to Warren and assume Bernie Sanders was lying to the American people and to the debate stage, basically framing it as Bernie Sanders not really giving a response. That was probably the worst moment of the night, but it was by far the only moment of the night where the process was clearly rigged against Bernie and against progressive ideology more generally. Somebody from Twitter clipped a few screenshots of the debate where they outlined questions on the screen. And these questions, some worse than others, really give you a sense for how the CNN debate framed things against Bernie Sanders and with right-wing talking points. I want to read out just these three examples to show you, because they really are illustrative. The first one, Warren supports a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. Why is Sanders' opposition to it wrong? The second one, Sanders' proposals would double federal spending over a decade. How will he avoid bankrupting the country? And finally, does Sanders owe voters an explanation of how much his healthcare plan will cost them and the country? Now, those questions in and of themselves are not necessarily wrong. How you'll pay for something, what the financial effects of a policy will be, explain the differences between your policy and a competitor's policy. None of that is unreasonable, but the framing in all three of those are fundamentally awful. They're either Bernie's wrong, tell me why, tell me how he's wrong and how you're not wrong, or this will destroy the country, prove to me otherwise. You never see framing like this from the left in debates. You never do. There's never a question that says, the rich are destroying this country. How do you plan to stop the rich from destroying this country? You might get a question about inequality, but it'll never be framed like that. There's never a question that says, hey, Joe Biden, your healthcare plan will leave 9 million people uninsured and people will pass away because of it. How does that make you feel? There aren't questions like that, because to do that forces neoliberals and right-wingers to go on the defensive. Because here's what they do to Bernie. When a regular candidate gets questions, they more often than not get a question that they can answer. When Bernie gets a question, what happens is it's usually predicated and framed on a false or misleading pretense. And so Bernie has to make a choice. Does he ignore that framing and go right to the answer? Or does he challenge the framing, which takes away momentum and which takes away the time he needs in some cases to explain his policy or his position? And so when they say, hey, Bernie Sanders, here's this lie about you. What do you think about this lie about you? And Bernie has to therefore correct the lie and then go into his actual answer on the question. They didn't ask Bernie, for instance, you know, Mr. Sanders, some rumors have been swirling around that you suggested a woman couldn't run for president. Can you speak to these rumors and what your views on the matter are? That might not be ideal framing, but I just made that up right now, like ad-libbed it. It's far better than what CNN did. Bernie Sanders can speak to that on a more neutral ground. Then you can go to Elizabeth Warren and say, Senator Warren, how do you respond? And again, it doesn't create this assumption that one of the two sides on that story is fundamentally truthful and one is fundamentally dishonest. It allows both people to explain their positions on the particular controversy if needed, but more importantly, on the broader question of women and electability, which I feel is actually a discussion that had some value last night, because it allowed more than one candidate to express factual matters about why a woman can win the presidency and defeat Donald Trump. And I agree. I'm a Bernie guy, but I do think a woman can beat Trump. But the whole problem with this debate was that from the very beginning, they didn't want to give Bernie Sanders any room to assert his narrative. They didn't want to even allow it. Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, everybody else, they all got room to assert their narratives. Klobuchar got plenty of time to assert her narrative that all Bernie Sanders and to a lesser degree Elizabeth Warren are offering are quote-unquote pipe dreams, and I'm the pragmatic senator that's going to win the presidency. Joe Biden got to assert his narratives that because Obama picked him, it absolves his Iraq war support, and on and on and on. Bernie Sanders never got that moment because the questions they ask are always framed around right-wing perspectives. The issues they talk about and the way they talk about the issues. You don't get questions on labor policy. You don't get questions on homelessness. You don't get questions on those things because if you did, it would either make the neoliberals look bad for their cruelty or it would make Bernie Sanders look great for his progressivism or both, and they can't have that. So at the end of the day, this debate was extremely disappointing to me. None of these debates have been great, but this has been the worst debate in this primary season, by far, in terms of its framing, in terms of the blatant anti-Bernie bias. Many others have noted that same thing. The hashtag CNN is trash is still trending. It's even trending here in Canada the morning after the debate. That's how goddamn awful this debate was. And it all goes to show that they're pulling out all the stops to stop a surging Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren, supposedly Bernie's ally and friend, she's pulling out all the stops to attack Bernie Sanders, to lie about Bernie Sanders. You guys all saw the clip at the end of the debate where she basically wouldn't shake Bernie's hand, shake Biden's hand, went at Bernie and started berating him. Unacceptable from my perspective that a supposed fellow progressive and friend would single out Bernie Sanders. And when we're 2 or 3 weeks away from the primary, she chooses to spread rumors about a fellow progressive, quote unquote, which will only serve to help Joe Biden in his effort to win the primary. That's the reality. All of this has been rigged against Bernie. But again, and I've been saying this in many of my videos, all this does is prove we're on the right track. If Bernie Sanders was floundering right now, I'm not saying he would get good coverage. I'm not saying he would get fair questions, but the singular focus of beating down Bernie would not have been evident in the debate. Bernie would be ignored, he would get a couple BS questions, and that would be it. Here, Bernie Sanders was facing the full brunt of this debate. As I noted in the live stream last night, this was a rigged debate that Bernie won, and Bernie had 8 competitors. He had the 5 other Democratic primary candidates on the stage, and he had the 3 moderators, and he bested all of them. Bernie Sanders continues to fight. His people continued to donate. Bernie Sanders raised a ton of money from a ton of donors yesterday as people realized that Elizabeth Warren, the rest of the Democratic Party, and virtually all of the media are lining up against him. Bernie Sanders doesn't have a lot of allies in the halls of power. He might not have a single ally in the Senate with what we've seen from Elizabeth Warren, and he only has a few in the Congress, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But at the end of the day, he has millions of friends across the United States and around the world, and those are the best friends to have. So we need to stand with Bernie Sanders more than we ever have before. I'm not being hyperbolic. This is gut check time. Bernie is going to face an attack like American politics hasn't seen in generations. And if his people aren't with him, Bernie won't win. Bernie Sanders is a fantastic man, a historic figure, but he's just one man. He needs his movement to be with him. We are going to be with him. We're going to help defeat the biased media, the biased Democratic Party, quote unquote, friends like Elizabeth Warren, and we're going to push forward together.